I'm Nick Pomeroy with PR Equipment here in Kearns, Texas. We are the kind of the Massey Ferguson dealer here in Central and North Texas, and one of our goals, or one of the values that we have here at PR Equipment, is about education. And so today we're not really trying to sell you anything. We just want to talk a little bit about this mesh system, maybe some how to make some of the adjustments to it that you might need to make in the field, and a couple little troubleshooting tricks as well, and just really kind of dive into this mesh system. This happens to be on a 1745D round baler, but this mesh system is pretty much the same that they've been using for a lot of years, and they also use it on the 2900 series balers, and I even think maybe the 2800 series balers had it very similar, if not the same. But anyway, this is a 1745D. You can kind of omit that because, like I say, if you have a 2900 series baler, it's going to be the same. So I really like this mesh system. It's simple, it's easy to load. There's just not much to it, but there are some tricks and tips that we ought to know. So a couple things here. I really like how open it can be. We can fold out the sides. There's a couple little D-rings, and we just get rid of those. We can fold out the sides, and we can drop out the bottom. And so if you're ever having to work on this or make any adjustments, it's just really easy to get in and do work on. I'll point out a few of the components here that I think are important. So this bar here, this is your mesh brake. And so what the mesh brake is going to do is it's going to kind of put a little resistance on that roll to pull that mesh tighter across that bale. And so this is kind of an integral part. This can also be a point of maybe some frustration depending on the type of net that you're using. So for most of the time, we don't really see a lot of trouble with it, but sometimes on cheaper net, you can't put the brake as tight because it'll rip, or it won't want to start because it can't catch. So we've seen needing to make some adjustments, and Massey Ferguson realizes that. So they have all these different holes, and so the way that the brake works is these two pneumatic cylinders, they push against this bar, and so it sets down on there. And so you've got these different holes, and so if you need to adjust it, you can change how tight that mesh brake is. And so some guys, you do have a little bit of variance within, even if, like say this mesh, you could set it tighter, a little looser. I like to set it kind of tight because it just makes that bale really clean and kind of squares it up a little bit, gets that mesh spread out there. So the brake is kind of an important feature, and it also doubles as a cradle. So when you're getting ready to load that roll of mesh, you can kind of prepare it on this cradle before you drop it in. But I want to talk about a few other things. So I'm going to move this mesh roll out of the way. A few more components we got here. This is the actuator. So the electric actuator is what actually applies the mesh or moves this mechanism. You've kind of got these levers here, and I'll actually roll through a sequence. I've got the controller set up so you can kind of watch what this looks like. That is in the home position. And that's in the apply position. So that's when it's going to be applying that mesh to your bale. And so if you notice, it kind of, when it raises the mesh door and pushes that mesh roll onto the bale. And so it's pushing that mesh on there, and it's going to keep, kind of help it get started. So I'm going to put it back to home. So you can kind of see that sequence that, like say, here's home, and that's applying the mesh. So that is kind of the sequence of what it goes through to apply the mesh. And like say, as long as there's nothing stopping this, and that's something you can kind of look for. If it's not functioning properly, is there a reason why it can't get through its cycle? It's possible that maybe the actuator over time, maybe it's going to give you some trouble. We don't have a lot of problems with them, but it's possible. So it's always good to keep that in mind, if it's not getting through a cycle. And then it doesn't matter whether you have a 2900 series baler with the C1000 console or the 1700 series baler. You can manually run through this cycle and just take a look, just to make sure it's going the entire throw or the entire distance in that cycle. So just to, like say, really pretty simple. Couple other things here. There are some adjustments, and so we talked about the mesh brake, but there's also some adjustments because this baler can run 48 or 51-inch net. And the same is true with the 5-foot baler, and I think it's 60 or 63-inch net, I believe. Don't quote me on that because truthfully, I only sell 4-foot balers in this part of the country. So don't quote me on that, but these little guides are there to to kind of help keep that mesh roll in line. So I'm going to grab a wrench and show you how to adjust those. Okay, so basically it's just one bolt on the bottom of each of these guides. I like to use a long extension on a 3/8 ratchet. It takes a 9/16 socket, and you can come in from below here and get on there. I suppose you could do it with a wrench, but it wouldn't be nearly as easy. And they like to get them tight from the factory. So if I was running a 48-inch rolling net, I'd want to slide these in. And of course, what you're trying to do is you'll set your rolling net up in there, and you'll want to use those guides to kind of keep it centered, but you don't want tension. You want a little gap because you don't want to be pushing against that cardboard tube and causing any friction or resistance there. So you'll adjust those to where your roll is centered, but has a little bit of gap to move around a little bit. So that's kind of how you set it for the mesh width. So I'm going to tighten that back down. So that's two of the important adjustments are kind of right there. There's a mesh knife. It doesn't give us much trouble. I've never had to replace one or sharpen one because it's really not cut. It's not really a knife. It's just ripping it. But I wanted to go a little bit more into kind of some troubleshooting. We sold one of these balers. Now, like I say, we kind of go through, when we sell one, we go through a PDI process that happens here in the shop. And then we also go out with the customer and make sure that the baler starts up properly with a new roll and mesh and just make sure everything gets going right. Well, we can't always catch all the issues. And so we had one that was not telling us it was feeding mesh. And so we went out and we were able to kind of troubleshoot that pretty quickly. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. This here is the sensing wheel. And so if you can see there, I'll come in from the bottom, there are two of these switches. And then on the wheel, there's a couple little magnets. And those magnets, when it spins, or I guess it's just one magnet, but it goes around there and hits those switches. And so the switches are seeing those pulses, and that's how it knows it's applying that mesh. Well, if one of those switches gives us trouble or the magnet's not there, it can kind of give us fits. And so I kind of want to show you all how to test these. And the beauty of this switch is used like, I don't know, 8 places on this baler. So the tailgate being shut uses this same switch. The twine system uses 3 of these switches to kind of tell it where it is in the sequence of the twine application. There's one for the size of the bale. This is what you adjust. You move this switch to change the size of the bale. So there's, like I say, there's a lot of places these switches come into play. So I think it's important to know how to troubleshoot them. And also, I like the fact that they use the same switch. It makes it really easy because you can keep one of these on the truck for like 10, maybe 12 bucks. And so if you ever had one go bad, you'd have it there. Now, if you don't ever use the twine, I have a lot of guys, we'll just take one off of the twine system and use it for a while. But so just kind of simulating what we ran into on that baler, basically what had happened, which we didn't know it at the time, was one of these switches was stuck open. In fact, it's this switch right here that was stuck open. So when we're testing these, we want to put it onto ohms or a continuity test or something like that. This meter has the ability to make noise when it beeps, which is kind of handy. If I can remember how to set the thing. Maybe it's on there. Unless somebody has smoked your meter and then you've got to get a new meter. I'll be back. Okay. So that's always a good reminder to check your test equipment before you go testing switches and such. I was trying to do a continuity test and I'm not getting any continuity even when I test it. Therefore, somebody's blowing the fuse in my meter. I don't think it was me, but it could have been. So it's always good to test it ahead of time. We're going to move that off to the side and go with this meter. And once again, let's make sure it's doing what we want it to do. So if you can hear there, it's making noise, and so we know it's working. Your meter might not have that noise making ability, and so you just got to check your ohms, which is going to give your continuity as well. In fact, I'll leave it in ohms just so that we can, that's probably more likely what yours is going to look like. So I'm actually going to set this up here so we can kind of all see it. Move these off to the side here. And so when we go to testing, I unplugged one of these switches. And I can rotate this wheel until that magnet is in alignment with that switch. So when the magnet is not in front of that switch, it should be open, or in this case, OL, it's out of limits. But when I rotate it around and that magnet is in front of it, it'll get continuity. And so that's all it's really looking for, is as that wheel's turning, it's seeing those pulses coming from those switches. And when it sees those pulses, it knows that sensing wheel is turning. So this switch is working properly. One way you can test these for yourself is, let's say your switch is out or wherever it may be, such as this one. You can come in back here and do the exact same test, and you can just supply a magnet. And so when I supply a magnet, I'm not getting any continuity. Just a word to the wise, it can be a little bit tricky to hold your probes on there. It's always great if you have a test harness, but I know in most cases that's not available, so we're not going to focus on that. But now we kind of know how to test those switches. So if you ever have a situation where you know you're applying mesh, but it doesn't think you do, or doesn't think you're applying mesh, it's not indicating you're applying mesh, it's always good to kind of check those. And it's a pretty simple little system to test, so I think anybody can kind of knock that out. So once again, we've kind of gone over the mesh brake. We've talked about the actuator. You can also test the actuator. The actuator is just a 2-pin system, so you can supply, in fact, these are little spade terminals, so you could easily come up with some jumper wires for that if you needed to test this. And that just, you'd want to unplug it so we don't send power back through the controller, but you could put power on there one direction, get the actuator to move one way, flip the polarity, flip your terminals, move it the other way, and make sure that thing works through its entire cycle. And at that point, hey, the actuator's good, we know our sensing wheels are good, so everything should be good to go. Once again, I really like how easy it is. It's simple to test this. It's simple to make these adjustments. It's just a pretty user-friendly mesh system, and so most folks can do a lot of this on their own and don't necessarily need us, here in the service department coming out and getting involved on all these things. And like I say, parts commonality, same switches used all over the Baler. So if you did need to keep one on the shelf or keep one in the truck, it's pretty inexpensive to do so. We've got the ability to run 51 or 48-inch net. We've got a mesh brake we can set. Like I say, depending on your quality of mesh or depending on the mesh you're using, sometimes we have to make an adjustment. One other thing I did see this season, because we put a lot of Balers in the field this year, I had a customer that he used our net, ran through that first roll, was loading a new roll of net, but it wasn't a roll of net from us. And so and here again, I'm not here to tell you what net to use, but it was a cheaper net, and it was having trouble getting started on the bale. And so what we actually did that helped, or at least got us by, we were able to just release the brake until it got started and then shut the brake, and then it kept going from there. And I think it was just having a little hard time grabbing that. It was kind of slippery. It was just, there wasn't much to grab onto with that particular net. It was kind of, I'd call it an economy net. But when we released it and it got started, we could set that brake back down, and from then on, we didn't have no issues. And so a couple little tips, if you guys have trouble with it feeding, you can always run through the cycle manually on the monitor. At some point, we may do a video showing you on the C1000. I just don't have a 2900 series Baler just yet. They're supposed to be coming. But I just want to show y'all just how easy it is to really get in and work on this mesh system, to load the net, to set the width, to set the brake. It's like I say, it's pretty user-friendly mesh system. Hey, if y'all are in the market for any hay equipment and you're in North Texas, Central Texas, we're kind of on the line there, maybe even partially East Texas, here kind of east of Corsicana. We want to be your dealer, and we really value service. So if y'all have any questions or anything, let us know. If there's something you'd like to see in a video, we can also help you out with that. Give us a shout, or you can text us at 903-270-0877. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Facebook. Come check us out. Thanks.